We have seen also on social media signs of military convoys on highways in the Rostov region. We have also seen this kind of really dramatic footage of troops deploying in the streets of the city of Rostov itself, and we have geolocated those videos to show that they're near the headquarters of the Russian Defense Ministry's Southern Military Command. Now, part of the challenge here is you can't really tell whether or not these forces are Russian Ministry of Defense forces or whether they are Wagner mercenary forces, but certainly their posture is aggressive. In some cases, we can see these soldiers prone position on the streets, kind of deploying around military buildings, while there are ordinary Russian civilians standing next to them in shorts and T-shirts. Certainly there is a very dramatic power struggle taking place right now. You've had one of Russia's most senior military commanders, General Surovikin, who's come out on camera urging Prigozhin and his Wagner mercenaries to submit to Russian law, to lay down their arms, and saying basically, we are brothers in arms. We have fought on the battlefields of Ukraine. Do not do this. Stop before it's too late. So there is clearly some kind of collision that is taking place right now, and Prigozhin is openly accusing the Russian Defense Ministry, the Russian Defense Minister himself, and the top general in the Russian military of genocide against the Russian people, and he wants to bring them to justice, he says. This is so dramatic. I do not know how this will unfold in the coming hours.
So, Ivan, that's what's happening in the Rostov region, what you've just explained. Then there's also stuff happening in Moscow. There are we've seen video of military vehicles on the streets of Moscow. The Kremlin is reportedly cordoned off. So what does that mean?
I mean, that, to me, looks like the center of power in Russia being fortified against potential threats. We have not seen any signs of any instability in Moscow itself right now. Ukraine and its borders and where the Wagner mercenary forces were deployed, it's at least, on a good day, a 15-hour drive from there, from Rostov, for example, all the way up to Moscow. But it's clear that there are checkpoints being set up, that there are efforts to try to stop whatever movement could be trying to come up from the south of the country. And let's try to keep in mind what the Wagner Mercenary Group is. This is a force, again, of mercenaries that has recruited from the penal system, from the prisons around Russia, and sent them into battle for months now, predominantly around the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. They were pulled out of there in the last month or so. The Russian Defense Ministry had issued an order that said that all mercenary groups had to sign contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry. The Wagner boss, Prigozhin, who is very present on social media, who has been leading basically an information campaign, propaganda campaign against the defense ministry for months now, accusing the top generals of being corrupt, of sending soldiers into battle without appropriate ammunition and weapons. He's been building this campaign for some time, and now he's basically turned 180 degrees against them and accused them of launching this invasion into Ukraine on false pretexts to basically get promotions for themselves and to earn money for themselves. So he's challenging Vladimir Putin's rationale for the war in the first place. And all of this is coming as active combat is still taking place all over Ukraine. There have been airstrikes against the Ukrainian capital overnight. The Ukrainian military is carrying out its counteroffensives. It's been launching raids into Russian territory that have been difficult for the Russian military to stop. So the question is, how will the Russian security forces deal with armored, battle-hardened ranks of convicted criminals and mercenaries now charging into the Russian heartlands? It's a scenario that is frankly kind of mind-boggling.
Excellent question. Thank you very much, Ivan, for explaining all of that. We'll try to get some answers because we're going to bring in now CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton and CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us late on this Friday night to understand the breaking news and the chaos in Russia. So let's start there, Colonel. What Ivan was just talking about. in terms of a military struggle, is it possible for Prigozhin and his troops to actually pull off a coup against the Russian military?
Well, Alisyn, I think it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. I think one of the key things to think about here is, how well prepared is Prigozhin to actually do this? How much support does he have from not only the internal military forces, but the intelligence services like the FSB and other security arms that the Russian has, the police, for example, the Ministry of the Interior. All of these elements would have to be in play here for Prigozhin to be successful. And it's unclear at this moment, at least to me, that he has that kind of support. It's possible for him to turn people potentially, especially with the kinds of messages that he's sending, but it seems highly unlikely that he's going to penetrate the whole Kremlin web of disinformation that has so permeated the Russian media landscape up until this point.
David, Prigozhin is claiming that the Russian military attacked his location and killed, he says, he's saying, a vast number of his own Wagner Group troops. Why would the Russian military do that? Is that because they've been embroiled in this power struggle, or is that to be trust? I mean, can we trust Prigozhin for saying that he was attacked by the Russian military?
Well, certainly, Alisyn, this has been brewing for a long time, and this has just been the latest and the biggest escalation of Mr. Prigozhin's attack on the two leading generals of the Russian military, who he's called incompetent and liars and so forth. Whether or not they really did attack that group it's hard to tell. And so far, I haven't heard any independent intelligence from the United States or allies that would support it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm sure everybody in the White House right now seems to be trying to figure this out as well. But I think a couple of things are probably likely to emerge from all of this murkiness. One, I agree with Colonel Leighton. I can't imagine that that Prigozhin could succeed here. But he's showing deep cracks in what Putin has tried to show for the past 20 years has been unchallenged rule. Remember how upset Putin got back in the early Obama administration when he accused Hillary Clinton of interfering in elections in Russia because she said that an election was rigged and he wanted to have an overwhelming support. Second, the Russian people who have had suspicions that this war was being conducted on false pretenses now have a Russian in their midst, one who they know well, making that case. And the third thing that's happening here, I think, is that the Ukrainians must be thinking, this is great. We've gotten rid of the Wagner Group, the most effective of the Russian troops. Now, the big concern, of course, for the American side is they're all watching Russia's nuclear arsenal, as we have at various other points. So far, I've heard no indication of anything moving, but that's always the big fear. What happens if you lose control?
Colonel, how does Ukraine seize on this chaos now?
Well, there are several things they can do, Alisyn, and as David mentioned, there are a lot of things the Ukrainians can actually look at here. One of the things I think that they would do is perhaps prosecute their advantage, their tactical advantage in Bakhmut, for example. That would be a major turning point potentially for the Ukrainians. Another thing that they could do is, as the Russian forces withdraw potentially, to defend against the Wagner Group, they could backfill that area and take over areas that the Russians abandoned if that happens. We don't know if that's going to happen, but those are the kinds of things that the Ukrainians are going to be looking for, I'm sure, and they will probably take advantage of them as quickly as they possibly can.
David, where is Vladimir Putin in all of this? And I don't just mean location-wise, I mean philosophically. Who does he side with, and where is he tonight?
Well, we don't know where he is right now, or at least I certainly don't. Frequently, if he's not in Moscow, he is at one of several of his dachas. He's got a home he uses a lot in St. Petersburg, where he came from. He's got one in Sochi. So there are different locations where he might be. But it is interesting that you have not heard him speak out on this point. Now, Prigozhin is a creature of Putin. They came up together in St. Petersburg. He was famously Putin's chef. The one time I saw him, Alisyn, it was when he was making a meal for George W. Bush and Putin during a summit meeting. He then went on, of course, to run the Internet Research Agency and do the trolling that was part of the interference in the 2016 election. And then, of course, starting up the Wagner Group. Putin has benefited from Prigozhin. His troops have been active in Syria, they've been active in Africa, and obviously they've saved the Russians in some parts of Ukraine. So that's why we assume he's been tolerated until now. And I think everyone's going to be sitting waiting to see if Vladimir Putin comes out and says something about this.
Colonel Leighton, David Sanger, thank you both so much for your expertise.